We all have a song to sing, a song that someone out there needs to hear, just the way it comes from our hearts and our lips. So says columnist and author Regina Brent. Greetings, I'm Fiona Harewood, author, speaker, and life coach. In my last video during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, in answering the question, what's next? I mentioned that the next time you heard from me, I would share how I knew that I had found my God-given ministry, how I knew that I was walking in my purpose, and that is standing up for those oppressed by domestic violence. When my life started going downhill as a result of the bad choices I made, I couldn't see today. But I remember praying, asking God to take me to that place where I could look back at those horrible times and smile. And as you can see, I'm smiling. Before I even saw victory, I constantly felt within my spirit the need to chronicle some aspects of my life. But there was a problem. I was embarrassed to let people know what I had suffered at the hands of men who had claimed to love me. I was ashamed to say, this is Fiona's story. But then I found an immediate fix. I would tell my story as a work of fiction. I joined a writers group and there I began writing. I completed a manuscript about 2 years later and started submitting it to agents. For almost another 2 years, nothing happened, so I shelved it for a long time. God's timing is not ours, and our plans are not His. You see, when I wrote that manuscript, I was nowhere near being healed. I was still dealing with a lot of issues. Time passed and I changed my mind about doing anything with the manuscript. At one time, I used to wonder about my purpose in this world and even petition God about it on countless occasions. I was confident that I would recognize my purpose when it did show up, but I never expected that I would be telling my story, empowering victims of domestic violence, as well as making abusers aware that God has a plan for their lives too. In 2018, I lost the person closest to me next to my husband, my sister in Christ, June. I wanted to die with her. I felt like my life was over too. I prayed, got professional counseling, read books on managing grief. Nothing helped. On December 31st, 2018, I was on Facebook when I saw an ad for a free writer seminar to be held on January 1, 2019. My manuscript came to mind and I thought, it's the beginning of a new year. It may be a good time to revisit my manuscript and start anew. I felt that it could fill the void June's loss had created. I signed up for the seminar and was motivated. So on the night of January 1, 2019, 13 years after shelving my manuscript, I pulled out the thumb drive, plugged it into my computer, and started revisiting the document. The working title was River Never Smooth, but for reasons I couldn't explain, that title no longer resonated with me, so I started considering other options. I ran the new titles by family members and friends to get their feedback, but still couldn't settle on one. Then I posted the prospective title in a Facebook group asking for people's opinions. I provided a short summary of the book and explained that it was fictional. The group members kept asking one question. Why does the title sound so much like nonfiction when the book is a work of fiction? Only I could answer that question. The book was indeed nonfiction, but I was still ashamed to own my story. And at that time, I had no plans to change the genre. Meanwhile, I noticed that during this time, many women were being murdered by intimate partners. And listening to those cases on the news or reading about them on the internet greatly disturbed me. I often found myself crying for victims in those cases, people I don't even know. One evening, my prayer partner decided that before we prayed, we'd listen to an episode of Oprah's Super Soul Conversations, the podcast, where physician and New York Times bestselling author Dr. Larry Dossey discussed his book, Healing Words, The Power of Prayer and the Practice of Medicine. Dr. Dossey mentioned that prayer does have a healing effect when you put it to the test, and that over the years, research and statistics have proven that prayer works. The doctor said he came under attack for what he wrote, and he wasn't sure if he would have been able to withstand the criticism. However, he said that he knew what he had to say was right, especially because he had data to support the fact that prayer works. While listening to the interview, something stirred me. I noted with awe that although the doctor said he wasn't sure whether he would be able to withstand the criticism, he took a stand against his colleagues and fellow scientists. As Dr. Dossey continued his story, a profound question lodged itself deep in my mind. Are you ready to deal with your critics now? Remember, I was ashamed to present my book as nonfiction because of what I imagined people would say. After praying, the question lingered. So I eventually asked myself, who are my critics? Like an epiphany, my fictional manuscript came forcibly to my mind. I bolted upright in my bed. Yes, Lord, I said out loud. With your help, I can face any critic now. Later, I would come to realize that that was easier said than done. During the next week, I met with an author consultant regarding the naming of my book. Even though I had said yes to the Lord about facing my critics, it still didn't dawn on me that I needed to change the manuscript to nonfiction. I explained to the author consultant the naming problem I was experiencing. He began asking questions about the story. Is it a true story? Then why is it written as fiction? Whose story is it? Do you plan to reach victims of abuse using your story? To that question, I responded, yes. Hearing my answers, he gave a 7-word response. Fiona, you need to own your story. Immediately, a light bulb switched on in my mind, and I had confirmation for the second time that I needed, with God's help, to put myself out there and be brave so that I could help others. Sitting in front of my television, crying for victims of abuse, especially those who were killed by their abusers, wasn't enough. My tears couldn't save them. It was time for action. I rewrote my manuscript as nonfiction, and to the original title, River Never Smooth, added the tagline, Reclaiming Power After Abuse. There, I unashamedly aired my dirty laundry in public, knowing I would be helping many, even though I might be criticized. It felt like God had stripped me of fear, pain, and shame. Looking back now, I realized that in allowing me to write my story as a work of fiction, God began the healing process in my life, as I learned many years ago that writing brings healing. I recall last year I had my first church speaking engagement, and I asked God about what I should say to the people. His answer went something like this: "You've asked me about your purpose, and I've turned your trials into your testimonies. Walk in your purpose. Wherever you're used and whatever your theme, let it revolve around domestic violence and abuse. Empower those oppressed by this demonic force." But it has not been easy, and it's only because God not only made me a survivor, but also an overcomer, that I'm able to stand strong, lift my head high, and carry out his biddings. We all know that domestic violence carries a stigma, even though it has no boundaries. Hence, people treat survivors shabbily, as if they shouldn't tell their stories, and some go as far as to say, "Get over it." But try as these folks may, they cannot break the overcomer. You see, there is a difference between a survivor and an overcomer. Let's talk a little about the difference between the two. According to Pastor Troy Brewer of Troy Brewer Ministries, in his article, Survivor versus Overcomer, a survivor is someone who suffers a terrible attack and lives to tell about it. An overcomer is someone who suffers a terrible attack, then rises up and defeats his attacker. Survivors are victimized. Overcomers are victorious. Survivors have wounds. Overcomers have scars like Jesus. Survivors are peacekeepers. Overcomers are peacemakers. You see, survivors go through the fire, then live life in constant reference to how they were burned. Overcomers go through the fire and don't even have the smell of fire on their clothing, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, walking with the angel of God in the fiery furnace. Getting to the stage where I could carry the baton of an overcomer was not an overnight process. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't. But as it is said, God equips the called, and that's what he did with me. At one point, amongst the many things you know about me, I was ashamed to let people know that I was married 3 times. But when the Lord stepped on the scene and told me via the consultant to own my story, he stripped me of fear, pain, and shame. On this platform of standing up for the oppressed, I am only able to present my story because of God's help. As a result of my experience, I'm in the ministry of equipping some to steer clear of this outrageous injustice to mankind by mankind, and educating others about how to deal with their situations. Furthermore, the struggle doesn't end there. It's also challenging to get support in this forum. Some friends and maybe even family may ridicule you for speaking out. Additionally, although I have experienced healing, I'm not immune to tears. I rarely cry when delivering my presentations, but in preparing them, I have to revisit painful situations. And even though those walks down memory lane are not traumatic anymore, they can still bring me to tears. For author Kerry Oberbronner, God has turned my pain into my platform, and he has given me a message for those who need it. I have no doubt this is what I should be doing, because speaking to people and coaching them on how to deal with abuse and domestic violence, how to rise above their circumstances and find healing, how to steer clear of all those negative situations, bring me a sense of joy and fulfillment that I cannot really explain, especially when someone says to me, I needed to hear that. Sometimes I'm discouraged by people's actions and their negative vibes, but with God's help, I pick myself up and go again. Even if I bring hope to just one woman, who in turn changes her life, her family, her community, her nation, I would have done what the Lord entrusted me to do. So, what about you? Have you found the reason why you're in this world? Are you walking in your purpose? Well, if you aren't, or you're aspiring to get there, here are 6 principles you can take away. Firstly, if you're a person of faith, ask God what it is He would like you to do to reach others, and ask Him to show you how to do it. Secondly, examine your heart. What is that thing, that feeling within your gut that keeps resurfacing? When it surfaces, it lingers and you feel differently, even motivated. Mine was when many years ago I felt I needed to chronicle certain aspects of my life. That feeling never left me, and eventually it became a reality. So keep tabs on those nudges. Thirdly, ask yourself whether you had an impactful experience from which you have learned, and as a result, you're able to teach others. If it's positive, you can teach others how to do it. If it's negative, you can teach them how to avoid those situations. Fourthly, whatever you are entrusted to do, embrace it. Everybody will not become as famous as Steve Harvey or Jerry Seinfeld, owning platforms that evoke laughter. At times, I wish my platform wasn't so grim, but that's the part of God's vineyard in which I have been called to serve. And with His help, I try to do it to the best of my ability. Fifthly, do not be ashamed to share your story or walk in your purpose. I was there, ashamed to share my story. But when the Lord was ready to send me, He removed that shame. As I mentioned before, God equips the called. I couldn't do what I'm doing if my current husband had hang-ups about it. Prior to us serving the Lord together, I'm certain I would not have gotten His support. When I finally allowed Him to, God aligned me with the right partner, and now my husband is my biggest supporter. So, look at the bad things in your life and see how God has turned them around for good and use those experiences to help others. Finally, when you feel within your spirit that you should move, move. Don't put it off. Get up and do it. So, there you have it. How I know I'm walking in God's purpose, and 6 ways how you can walk in your purpose too. As columnist and author Regina Brett said in her book, God is Always Hiring, we all have a song to sing, a song that someone out there needs to hear, just the way it comes from our hearts and our lips. Go sing your song. Thank you for your support, and don't forget to comment. If you're new to my channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you will be alerted whenever I post new comment. For my company's motto, we empower, you overcome.